Speaking of Western civilization, to kind of wrap this all up in a bow, what do you think is going to happen? You obviously you're pro free speech, you're anti safe space, trigger warning, and it's all sort of stemmed from the gender pronoun issue. Where in a nutshell, you said
that's what brought all the attention.
Yeah, that's what brought all the attention. And obviously, I have much more to say, and we'd love to have you back to say more. But since that is such a hot button issue right now, we've talked about that. My producer, not gay, Jared, and Jordan, who's in here, they've gone so far so quickly. Yeah. It was like, when we have same sex marriage, what do? I don't know. Where do trannies take a dump? And let's make that the next civil rights movement. Do you think there's going to be, being a sort of understanding, I guess, consumerist behavior or sociology, do you think there's going to be a rejection of it and people are just going to, it's going to go too far and people will go back to traditional?
I think the simplest outcome is increasing polarization and misunderstanding. That's the most likely outcome, because the stupidest, easiest outcome is the one that's most likely. Right? Because you don't have to do anything and you can be clueless and you'll get that.
Nihilist.
Yeah. It doesn't mean it's the inevitable outcome.
You're a Christian Nolan film. Christopher Nolan. Not Gidget will get me if I don't get that right.
So. Well, so hopefully there's an alternative. And I think the alternative, I believe, and I've believed this for a very long time, is that the alternative is for people to learn about their civilization, to incorporate its proper doctrines into their behavior, and to grow up and live properly, carefully, awake, and to speak carefully, and to act carefully. And that I believe that if enough people do that, then we'll avoid the polarization. That's the inevitable consequence, because the problem is that people who are characterologically weak, and I don't mean this in a judgmental sense, I mean weak in that they can't withstand the onslaught of life, and they get hurt because of it. They turn to nihilism or they turn to ideology, and when they do those things, polarize. Even if they turn to ideology, it's a toss-up whether it's the radical right or the radical left. It depends on their character.
Yeah.
And then that requires very little effort on people's part. You can learn the rules to those games very rapidly. And then people polarize, and then they have someone to hate, and they don't have to take any responsibility. And
you know, what's sort of funny about that statement is I have no problem with people having an ideological bias. I have no problem with people seeing the world through a prism. I think we all do. My thing is, if you're left or you're right, just don't lie to me. But ironically enough, we were probably one of the most balanced shows on the primaries and on Trump, and I can't stand Hillary Clinton. I couldn't stand the left, but I certainly would criticize Trump where I thought it was fair, and that would infuriate people. But I have no problem saying I am a conservative. I look through the world through that lens, and I think that allows me to be somewhat objective because I'm aware of.
Yes, well, that's about the best you can do. I mean, one of the things that our research and other people's research has indicated is that conservatives are conservative and liberals liberal because of their temperaments. It's partly biological. So, for example, conservatives tend to be higher in conscientiousness, which is industriousness and orderliness, particularly orderliness, and lower in openness.
Does that sound like someone?
So, and
God crucified him for not putting things away properly.
Well, and the orderliness seems to be the thing that's driving things on the conscientiousness side. And so what that means is that conservatives, roughly speaking, make better managers and administrators. Okay, now liberals are higher in openness, which is both interest in ideas and interest in aesthetics, and they're lower in conscientiousness. And one of the consequences of that is that they tend to make better entrepreneurs and artists. And so our society is basically set up, and this is something people really need to think about, is that...
But that's odd, because nearly all business owners tend to be more conservative.
Not the entrepreneurs. Go to Silicon Valley.
Well, come on, you're talking about a limited amount of people, and Steve Jobs beats the shit out of his kids.
Well, I do consulting work for this company called the Founder Institute, and we've tested 40,000 would-be entrepreneurs from all over the world, 165 different cities. It's the biggest early-stage tech incubator in the world now. The guy who runs it, Adeo Resi, has created 2,500 new businesses in 4 years doing this. And we know what predicts entrepreneurial ability. And so the liberals are really interested in how ideas relate to one another, and they like to jump from one thing to another. And it does make them more creative, but they're not very good at implementation. Whereas the conservatives are very good at implementation and at detail. And so roughly speaking, the conservatives need the liberals to start companies and to generate new ideas, even though a lot of those ideas are going to be bad.
Right.
Okay, but the liberals need the conservatives to run the damn companies. Now, you can be temperamentally conservative and temperamentally liberal. And those are valid viewpoints because there's a place for those viewpoints in the world. They can function as tools. But what you have to do is exactly what you just said. if you're a conservative, you need to listen to the liberals because they have some things to tell you. And the liberals, and I think they're far worse at this at the moment, by the way, the liberals have to learn to listen to the conservatives because the conservatives hold things together and stabilize things.
Right.
Yeah, well, so the dialogue. Now, the reason free speech is so important is because liberals and conservatives have to communicate in order to keep society going. And it's communication that's central to free speech. You have to be able to talk to each other, or you separate into armed camps and you either one becomes the other's slave, one becomes a tyrant, or there's conflict.
Well, and that's what worries me too in the era of Trump, and I'm thrilled to see leftists losing their minds. I'd lie if I said that weren't the case. But, you know,
I also because you're a bad person.
It is because I'm a horrible
that's
person.
Why. Yeah.
And, you know, we always, when the election night came around, we kind of voted state Republican ticket and held our nose. I think everyone at Louder with Crowder did, with a few exceptions. But it is... I still want to be able to criticize him without people going absolutely ballistic. And I see that for the first time being bred on the right, so to speak. I don't think these people are conservative, but on the left it was well known that they couldn't handle criticism. You had to follow lockstep. It was a very narrow tent. The Republican Party was a very wide tent. And now in the era of Trump, people get so personal and vindictive if you just say, you know what, I don't support a 35% tariff on companies having to outsource jobs to remain afloat, and they get furious. So I don't know if you've noticed that in Canada, but certainly in the States for the first time, that sort of dogmatic, anti-critical speak of their preferred leader.
Yeah, well, that's part of the polarization process, right?
I think media is largely responsible. We talked about this, and then all of a sudden New York Times and everyone were talking about this. Let me present to you two worlds as the layman that I am. Mom joins Facebook, she's pro-Trump. Daughter joins Facebook, YouTube, she's pro-Hillary, right? Oh, Donald Trump's going to be a great president. Like, Donald Trump has brilliant cabinet appointments. Like, the daughter, Donald Trump doesn't release his tax returns. Like, Donald Trump is a rapist. Like, so you go 6 months and you've liked these pages and you've consumed information that way. Well, the Facebook algorithm, the YouTube algorithm, it's not, hey, you might really need to hear, it's you might also like, to the point where people entirely consume information that is nothing but confirmation bias. And I wouldn't even...
See, what happens then is that amplifies their temperamental proclivities.
Right.
And we have research showing this too. So conservatives do tend to consume media that fosters a conservative viewpoint, and so do liberals. And so one of the ways, I mean, this was the whole purpose of education at one point, is to expose you to views that contradicted your own, and to help you find value in those alternative views.
Yeah.
And the reason for that was to help you get out of your confirmation bias and the tendency of that to augur you into a narrow viewpoint that is no longer representative of the world.
Right.
It's really a bad thing when that happens. It's like you're a celebrity that's completely surrounded by sycophants who only tell you what you want to hear.
Exactly.
What happens is that because you're not getting any corrective information anymore, your weaknesses don't get corrected and they start to take you over.
Right.
And that's exactly what's happening in our polarized political landscape. It's like the weaknesses of the radical left viewpoint are starting to predominate, to dominate the entire spectrum on the left side of the...
Yeah, I think it's already dominated the left for a long time, and now unfortunately I see it permeating the right a little bit, where they're willing to cannibalize themselves just because you're critical of one action of Trump. And that really worries me in the United States.
Yeah, well, the thing about criticism is, for a political leader, is that criticism can be a really good thing, because if you're a good critic, you don't only say why the person is wrong, you offer some alternatives that might be better, and you force them to sharpen their arguments. And people think of criticism as insult, something like that. And that criticism is, here's a way that you could have done that better.
Right.
And you want that. You want criticism from other people. I mean,
I think you do, and I think I do. And what's sort of ironic in all of this is that we used to say the fringe, sort of your left, my right. The fringe left, their left. So it's okay. I know you're a very educated man. I'm doing it for them. Your left, my right, and then the fringe, my left, your right. But really, that's mainstream left and right now. They aren't fringe, and it seems like in the middle is what would once have been called the fringe. I don't consider myself a moderate, but I find much more common ground with you than I do many Republicans, certainly nearly all liberals, in just being a critical thinker. That seems like we're a shrinking minority to the point where we would really be considered more fringe than someone with a Trump sign and a funny hat, or a social justice warrior who has a snowflake t-shirt and is crying in the corner.
Well, that's a consequence of polarization, right? Because when things polarize, then viewpoints become increasingly black and white, and they become increasingly simple. And the problem with that, like, I think it was Einstein who said that an explanation should be as simple as possible, but no simpler. And political beliefs should be like that too. They should be simple as possible, but no simpler. And the thing about political beliefs is they're not beliefs about statements of fact about the world. They're beliefs about how to move forward and to solve problems. And the real test of a political belief is, can it specify a problem? And then can it solve the problem? And the way that we practice those political beliefs and their formulation is through dialogue and critical dialogue. And the critical dialogue is, well, here we've got a bad representation of this. You have a bad representation of it, a poor representation, and so do I. So let's keep, that's what we're doing right now. Let's keep talking about it until our model of the problem is more and more and more detailed. And then maybe we can start to generate some solutions. And then maybe we can start to agree on those solutions and implement them and test them.